My father slid a freshly printed rental agreement across the kitchen table and tapped the last page with one finger. "Sign it." I glanced down. My monthly rent had changed from $1,300 to $2,100. I looked back up. "There has to be a mistake." "There isn't," my mother said without the slightest hesitation. "Vanessa's boutique is struggling. The family needs to pull together." Across the table, my younger sister leaned back with the confidence of someone who already knew how this conversation would end. "I really appreciate this, Cindy," she said with a smile. "You know, you've always had the stable job." I stared at her. "My rent is increasing $800 a month, so you can keep selling designer handbags." Vanessa shrugged. "You can afford it." My father folded his arms. "If you refuse," he said calmly, "you're free to move out. We'll find another tenant." The room went silent. I had spent 7 years paying every rent check early. I'd replaced broken appliances without asking for reimbursement. I'd helped maintain the property like it was my own home. Yet somehow, I was the selfish one. I picked up the contract, read every line one more time, then slowly placed it back on the table. "I'll give you my answer in a few days." None of them realized I'd already made the most important decision of my life. And they had no idea that moving out was the one thing they couldn't afford. My name is Cindy Bennett, and until that afternoon, I believed keeping peace in my family was worth almost any sacrifice. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact moment that belief finally broke. It wasn't when my parents demanded another favor. It wasn't when Vanessa smiled, as though my paycheck belonged to her. It was when my own mother looked me in the eyes and said, "Family helps family," while asking me to carry the cost of someone else's bad decisions. Vanessa had opened her boutique 3 years earlier. At first, everyone celebrated her. My parents hosted parties. They bragged to relatives about their entrepreneurial daughter. Every family dinner somehow turned into another speech about how Vanessa was building something special. Whenever the boutique struggled, there was always an explanation. The weather had hurt sales. Construction downtown had reduced foot traffic. Customers just weren't spending enough. There was always another excuse. There was never any discussion about Vanessa's spending habits, expensive inventory, or refusal to adjust her business. Instead, there was always another person expected to help. Usually, that person was me. I worked as a senior financial analyst. My income was comfortable because I'd spent years earning it through long hours, certifications, and promotions. I budgeted carefully. I avoided debt. I saved consistently. To my parents, that didn't make me responsible. It made me available. I rented the downstairs unit of the duplex they owned. The arrangement had started after college as a way to save money, but over 7 years, I'd become something much more valuable than a tenant. I was dependable. Every first of the month, my payment arrived before they asked. Whenever something broke, I handled it without complaints. If a repair couldn't wait, I often paid first and sorted out reimbursement later. I had never imagined those habits would eventually be used against me. My father pushed the unsigned contract closer again. "You've got a good salary, Cindy. I've worked for it. And Vanessa is trying to build something." I looked directly at my sister. "If business is that difficult," I asked quietly, "why doesn't she move into a smaller location until things improve?" Vanessa's smile disappeared instantly. "Because successful businesses don't shrink. They do if they want to survive." Before she could answer, my mother cut in sharply. "Don't criticize your sister. I'm asking a reasonable question." "No," she snapped. "You're looking for excuses, not a help." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I already help." "You pay rent," my father corrected. "That's different." I almost laughed. I'd been paying rent for 7 straight years. Now, suddenly, it wasn't enough. The conversation dragged on for another 20 minutes. Every practical suggestion I offered was dismissed. Every concern I raised became proof that I wasn't supportive enough. Meanwhile, something about my parents kept bothering me. Whenever money came up, they exchanged nervous glances. My father rubbed the back of his neck constantly. My mother interrupted him several times before he finished sentences. It didn't feel like two people confidently helping one daughter. It felt like two people desperately hiding something. Eventually, I stood. "I'll think about it." My father nodded, clearly satisfied. "Good, we knew you'd do the right thing." Vanessa smiled again. "I'll start planning next month's inventory." Nobody asked whether I could actually afford another $800 every month. Nobody asked what I'd have to give up. As I walked toward the front door, my mother called after me. "Don't take too long, we need your answer." I turned back just long enough to smile politely. "You'll have it soon." I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and sat in my car without starting the engine. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to figure out how to make everyone else happy. I was wondering what would happen if I simply walked away. What if the one person they took for granted stopped saying yes? What if moving out was exactly what they couldn't afford? The very next morning, I opened my laptop before work and searched for apartments. Not because I wanted to leave. Because for the first time, I believed I needed to. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Vanessa. If I had, they would have spent the next several days trying to convince me that protecting my own finances was somehow an act of betrayal. Instead, I quietly started reclaiming my future. During lunch, I called my best friend, Melissa. "You sound exhausted," she said the moment she answered. I laughed softly. My parents raised my rent. Again. This time from $1,300 to $2,100. Silence. Then she asked, "Wait, why?" "So they can keep Vanessa's boutique open." Melissa didn't speak for several seconds. "Cindy, you've got to be kidding." I wish I was. And they actually admitted that's what the money is for. They didn't even try to hide it. Melissa sighed. "You've been carrying that family for years." "I haven't." "You have, you just don't call it that." Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. Because once I started thinking honestly, memories kept surfacing. 7 years earlier, renting from my parents had seemed like the perfect arrangement. The duplex was close to my office. The rent was fair. They told me we'd all benefit. At first, we did. But gradually, the boundaries disappeared. Whenever something needed fixing, my father would say, "You're handy enough." When the downstairs refrigerator failed, I bought a replacement because they said cash was tight. When the water heater burst one winter, I paid the emergency plumber so the damage wouldn't spread. "We'll reimburse you," my mother promised. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they forgot. Eventually, I stopped asking. It wasn't worth another uncomfortable conversation. Then there were the property taxes. One autumn afternoon, my father had knocked on my door looking unusually embarrassed. "Cindy, we're waiting on some money." "How much?" "We're short on this quarter's taxes." Without thinking twice, I transferred the amount. He hugged me and promised it would only be temporary. Months passed. The money never came back. Neither did the conversation. Back then, I told myself families weren't supposed to keep score. Now I wondered why I was always the one paying the bill. That evening, I stopped by my parents' house under the excuse of returning a package that had been delivered to my unit by mistake. My mother was alone in the kitchen. She smiled when she saw me. "Have you made your decision?" "Not yet." She nodded, pretending patience. I leaned against the counter. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If I agree to this increase, is it temporary?" Her smile disappeared. "What difference does that make?" "It makes a very big difference. It's family." I know. So why are you treating this like a business contract? Because it is one. She folded her arms. You've always been so practical. I work with numbers. And sometimes, numbers matter less than loyalty. I looked directly at her. So this rent stays at $2,100 indefinitely. Instead of answering, she frowned. Good daughters don't keep score. The sentence landed harder than she probably intended. Good daughters. Not responsible tenants. Not hardworking professionals. Just daughters who paid without asking questions. I realized she wasn't avoiding my question. She simply didn't think I deserved an answer. Later that night, I opened social media while eating dinner. Vanessa had uploaded another promotional video. She stood inside her boutique wearing a designer blazer, surrounded by expensive handbags and imported shoes. The caption read, "New luxury collection just arrived. Dream big." Hundreds of smiling emojis filled the comments. I stared at the screen. Just hours earlier, my parents had insisted the family needed emergency sacrifices. Yet Vanessa was proudly showing off thousands of dollars worth of fresh inventory. I whispered to myself, so that's where it's all going. The next afternoon, I toured 3 apartments. The first was too small. The second was overpriced. The third felt different. It was a quiet townhouse community, about 15 minutes from work. Clean. Safe. Peaceful. The leasing manager smiled after showing me the unit. If you're interested, we can process your application today. I am. For the first time in years, I signed paperwork that benefited only me. Not my parents. Not Vanessa. Me. Walking back to my car, I felt strangely calm. Almost guilty. Then I reminded myself that choosing stability wasn't selfish. It was overdue. 2 days later, my application was approved. I signed the lease electronically during my lunch break. Then I hired a moving company for the following weekend. Everything was scheduled. Everything was paid. Everything was quiet. Nobody in my family knew. My phone rang just as I finished confirming the movers. Dad. I answered. Hi. His voice was warm, almost cheerful. I hope you've come to your senses. I looked at the lease agreement on my screen. Then I smiled. He had absolutely no idea what I had just signed. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. By 8 o'clock, the moving truck was parked in front of the duplex. 2 movers stepped out, introduced themselves, and immediately started carrying boxes from my apartment. I hadn't made a scene. I hadn't left angry notes. I hadn't announced my plans. I simply decided to leave. The first few trips went unnoticed. Then my mother's front door flew open. "Cindy," she called, "what is all this?" I turned toward her. "I'm moving." For a second, she just stared. Then my father's voice echoed from inside. "Elaine, what's going on?" He walked onto the porch, saw the truck, and stopped so suddenly one of the movers almost bumped into him with a bookshelf. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "You told me I was free to move out." "That wasn't. You said someone else would gladly pay the rent." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Unfortunately for everyone involved, they weren't alone. My Aunt Carol, Uncle Dennis, 2 cousins, and Vanessa were already upstairs for a weekend family brunch my mother had organized. Within moments, they were all standing outside, watching the movers carry my furniture away. Vanessa folded her arms dramatically. "Oh my gosh," she said loudly. "You're seriously leaving?" "Yes. Because we asked for help. Because you asked me to finance your business." She scoffed. "Listen to yourself." Before I could answer, my mother raised her voice just enough for everyone to hear. "I can't believe you'd abandon your family when your sister needs you most." Several relatives turned toward me. I recognized those expressions immediately. Confusion, judgment, disappointment. Exactly the audience my parents wanted. "Cindy," Aunt Carol said gently, "surely this can be worked out." Before I could respond, my father answered for me. "She refuses to support her own sister." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "I've worked so hard for my boutique." "And I've worked hard for my paycheck," I replied. Nobody spoke. I looked around at my relatives. "You all deserve to know what actually happened." My mother immediately interrupted. "This is private." "No," I said calmly. "It became public the moment I was accused of abandoning the family." I took a slow breath. My parents increased my rent from $1,300 to $2,100. Several eyebrows shot upward. They told me the extra $800 every month would be used to keep Vanessa's boutique operating. Complete silence. Uncle Dennis frowned. "They actually told you that?" "Yes." My father stepped forward. "You're making it sound worse than it is." "I'm repeating exactly what you said." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "It's called helping family." I nodded. "I've been doing that for years." The mood changed. Not dramatically, but enough. People stopped looking at me. They started looking at my parents. Uncle Dennis crossed his arms. "Richard, one tenant's rent shouldn't determine whether a business survives." "It's temporary," my father replied. "Then why raise it by $800? Richard hesitated. "It was necessary." "For the boutique?" "Yes." Dennis wasn't convinced. "I've owned a hardware store for 20 years, he said. $800 a month doesn't rescue a failing business." For the first time that morning, my father looked genuinely uncomfortable. He glanced toward my mother before answering. "We're handling it." Dennis studied him for another second. Then he simply nodded. But I could tell he wasn't satisfied. Neither was anyone else. The movers continued loading my belongings. Sofa, dining table, bookshelves. Every piece that disappeared into the truck made my parents visibly more anxious. Not angry. Anxious. That difference stayed with me. As one mover carried my filing cabinet outside, I stepped toward the front entrance to collect my last box. That's when I noticed it. A large, certified envelope resting on the hallway table. Across the upper corner, bold letters identified the sender. First National Bank. My father saw my eyes move toward it. His reaction was immediate. He lunged forward, snatched the envelope off the table, and tucked it under his arm. "That's none of your business." I didn't ask. His grip tightened anyway. For someone insisting everything was about Vanessa's boutique, he seemed remarkably nervous about paperwork from the bank. By early afternoon, nearly everything I owned was inside the truck. I walked through the empty apartment one final time. 7 years. Every birthday. Every holiday. Every promotion. I'd built an entire adult life inside those walls. Now they echoed. I picked up my keys, walked upstairs, and placed them quietly in my father's hand. "I'm leaving the apartment in good condition." He barely looked at the keys. "You'll regret this." "I don't think I will." My mother shook her head. "You've chosen money over family." I met her eyes. "No. I've chosen not to become someone else's emergency fund." Without waiting for another argument, I turned toward the moving truck. I climbed into my car. The engine started. As I checked my mirror, a white sedan pulled slowly into the driveway. The driver's door opened. A man in a navy suit stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. He looked directly at my father. "I'm here from First National Bank." My father's face drained of color. The bank representative walked toward the front door before my moving truck had even reached the end of the street. 3 weeks after I moved into my new townhouse apartment, the silence felt almost unfamiliar. No unexpected knocks on my door. No last-minute requests for money. No conversations that somehow ended with me feeling guilty for having a steady paycheck. For the first time in years, my monthly budget belonged entirely to me. I unpacked the last box in my home office when my phone buzzed. Dad. I let it ring. A few seconds later, it stopped. Then Mom called. Then Vanessa. 3 missed calls in less than 5 minutes. I placed the phone face down and continued arranging my books. The calls didn't stop. The next morning, my father left a voicemail. Cindy, let's talk. There's no reason to keep this going. A second voicemail arrived that evening. We've been thinking, we can reduce the rent. I almost laughed. Reduce it. Only a month earlier, they had insisted $2,100 was completely reasonable. Now they were negotiating. 2 days later, another message came. You can move back in for $1,400. The offer was suddenly lower than my original rent. That made no sense. Unless the money had never really been about fairness. It had been about desperation. Vanessa reached me next. She didn't bother pretending to be polite. This is all your fault. I remained quiet. If you had just stayed where you belonged, none of this would be happening. What exactly is happening? You know. I actually don't. She exhaled sharply. Mom cries every day. That isn't because I moved. You're unbelievable. No, Vanessa. I spoke calmly. I'm just no longer paying for your decisions. She hung up without another word. That weekend, Aunt Carol invited me for coffee. She looked uncomfortable before she even sat down. I wasn't sure whether to tell you. Tell me what? She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly. The bank posted foreclosure notices on your parents' duplex. I froze. Foreclosure. She nodded. I saw the paperwork myself. Already. They've been there twice. Pieces of the past month suddenly started sliding into place. The certified envelopes. My father's panic. The impossible rent increase. The desperate phone calls asking me to return. None of it fit the explanation I'd been given. Not by itself. Driving home, my mind replayed conversations I'd ignored for years. Every time my parents claimed money was temporarily tight. Every repair they couldn't quite afford. Every request for another small favor. Every promise that things would improve after Vanessa's next successful season. Every uncomfortable glance they exchanged whenever finances came up. And then there was moving day. The bank representative hadn't looked surprised. He had looked expected. That realization settled heavily in my chest. The boutique wasn't the entire problem. It couldn't be. Something much bigger had already been falling apart before my rent was ever raised. Monday afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was Dad. I answered. Cindy. His voice sounded older than I remembered. We need to meet. About what? I owe you an explanation. I waited. It's bigger than Vanessa. I leaned back in my chair. I figured. Can we talk tonight? After a long pause, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. Dad looked exhausted. His suit hung loosely on him. Dark circles framed his eyes. He wrapped both hands around a cup of untouched coffee. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked up. I wasn't honest with you. I know. The rent. It wasn't just about Vanessa. He slowly nodded. No. He took a long breath. The situation is much worse than you realize. I waited. I should have told you years ago. He lowered his eyes to the table. We borrowed against the duplex. My heart sank. To keep helping Vanessa. He nodded again. And then, before he could finish, someone approached our table. Dad. We both looked up. The same bank officer I had seen on moving day stood beside us, holding a thick folder of documents. Mr. Bennett, he said professionally, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need your signature acknowledging receipt of these updated foreclosure documents. Dad closed his eyes. For a brief moment, he didn't move at all. Then he slowly reached for the pen. Everything I thought I knew about the rent increase suddenly seemed much smaller than the truth waiting inside that folder. My father stared at the foreclosure documents for several long seconds before finally signing the acknowledgement. The bank officer accepted the paperwork with a sympathetic nod. Mr. Bennett, I strongly encourage you to contact the loss mitigation department immediately. At this stage, your options are extremely limited. I understand, my father replied quietly. The officer offered a polite goodbye and walked away. Neither of us spoke until he disappeared through the cafe door. Finally, Dad let out a slow breath. I never wanted you to find out like this. I looked at the thick folder on the table. Then tell me the truth. He nodded. You deserve that. He rubbed both hands across his face before beginning. When Vanessa opened the boutique, business wasn't bad. I remember. But after the first year, sales dropped. So you helped her. We thought it would only be temporary. He gave a bitter laugh. It never was. They had taken out a home equity loan against the duplex to give Vanessa enough money to expand her inventory. When that wasn't enough, they refinanced the property. Then they borrowed again. Every time, Vanessa promised the next season would be different. Every time my parents believed her. Every time the debt grew larger. We kept telling ourselves we were protecting her future, Dad admitted. But we were destroying ours. I listened without interrupting. The mortgage payments kept increasing, he continued. Interest rates changed. The loans became harder to manage. So you needed more money. He nodded. Every month. I looked directly at him. That's why my rent went up. Yes. You already knew you were behind on the mortgage. His shoulders slumped. We'd been receiving warning letters from the bank for months. I remembered every certified envelope, every nervous glance, every interrupted conversation. You knew $2,100 wasn't going to save anything. His eyes filled with regret. It wasn't enough. Then why ask me for it? Because you were the only reliable income we had. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they surprised me. Because they confirmed exactly how my parents had come to see me. Not as their daughter. As their financial safety net. The boutique wasn't the real emergency, I said quietly. No. It was the duplex. Dad nodded. We were trying to keep the mortgage current long enough for things to improve. But they never did. No. I sat back in my chair. So when you told me I could move out, we thought you were bluffing. When I actually left, he closed his eyes. The mortgage payment became impossible. There it was. The truth that had been hiding beneath every accusation. They hadn't panicked because I refused to save Vanessa's boutique. They panicked because the one dependable payment they had built their entire plan around disappeared overnight. My moving out hadn't created their financial crisis. It had exposed one that already existed. News traveled through the family much faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, everyone knew the bank had begun foreclosure proceedings. Relatives who had criticized me during moving day started calling. Aunt Carol came first. I owe you an apology. You don't have to. I do. She shook her head. I thought you were abandoning your family. I know. I had no idea you'd been carrying them for years. Uncle Dennis called the following evening. You tried to warn us something wasn't adding up. I wasn't even sure myself. I should have asked more questions. One by one, the people who had judged me began understanding what had actually happened. Not because I defended myself, because the facts eventually spoke louder than the accusations. Vanessa reacted differently. She refused to accept responsibility. At another family gathering, she insisted the foreclosure was my fault. If Cindy hadn't moved, none of this would have happened. Uncle Dennis calmly looked at her. No. The room fell silent. This started long before Cindy packed a single box. Vanessa looked at my parents. Neither of them argued. For the first time in her life, they couldn't rescue her by shifting the blame onto someone else. Without new financing, the boutique closed less than a month later. The clearance sale lasted 2 weekends. Then the lights went out for good. My parents had opportunities to sell the duplex before the foreclosure was finalized. Their attorney recommended it. Even the bank suggested listing the property voluntarily to reduce the financial damage. But they waited too long. They kept hopping for one more miracle. One more loan. One more chance. Eventually, the foreclosure proceeded. The duplex that had been in our family for years was sold. A few weeks later, Richard and Elaine moved into a modest 2-bedroom rental across town. The move was quiet. No celebration. No speeches. Just boxes being carried into a place much smaller than the home they had fought so desperately to keep. Several months passed. Life became surprisingly peaceful. Without the inflated rent hanging over me, I accelerated my savings. Every month, I transferred the extra money into an account labeled Future Home. Watching that balance grow reminded me that my hard work should build my own life, not cover someone else's mistakes. Less than a year later, I signed papers on a townhouse of my own. As I walked through the empty living room after closing, I smiled. Every payment I made from that day forward would build equity for me. Not rescue debt I didn't create. My relationship with my parents changed forever. We still spoke. We still saw each other on holidays. But the conversations were different. Whenever money came up, I politely ended the discussion. I'm not able to help financially. The first few times felt uncomfortable. Eventually, it became normal. My mother apologized more than once. I thought we were doing the right thing. I believe you thought that, I replied. But you stopped treating me like your daughter. She looked down. You became the solution to every problem we created. She didn't argue. Because she couldn't. Ironically, relatives who once questioned my loyalty began asking for budgeting advice, investment recommendations, and financial planning tips. Not because I had become wealthy overnight. Because they had finally seen the difference between responsibility and being taken advantage of. As for Vanessa, she eventually found a stable management position at another retailer. For the first time, she worked within a budget instead of expecting someone else to absorb the losses. Whether she learned anything from everything that happened, I honestly don't know. That was no longer my burden to carry. I had spent years believing love meant saying yes. What I finally learned was that healthy love also knows when to say no. I didn't destroy my parents' home by moving out. I simply stopped pretending their choices were my responsibility.